When Ophelia Grant, an elderly black woman, walked into the fancy restaurant, she didn't quite fit the usual crowd. Dressed modestly, she was quickly judged by Ethan, a young waiter who refused to serve her. Little did he know, her son Darius was the owner of the entire place. As Ophelia prepared to leave, what happened next shocked everyone. This is a story about prejudice, second chances, and unexpected truths. Stay tuned and share your thoughts in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and support us for more thought-provoking stories like this one. The city's skyline was awash in the orange glow of a fading autumn sun as Ophelia Grant made her way down the bustling streets of New York. The cool air bit at her skin, but she was unfazed. Her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts heavy as she approached Le Nouveau Prestige, an upscale restaurant owned by her son. Ophelia's appearance was simple: a dark overcoat, a modest dress, and her hair neatly tied in a bun. To the world, she might seem ordinary, but there was nothing ordinary about her. Beneath her quiet demeanor lay decades of wisdom, struggle, and perseverance. Tonight, however, she sought no attention, only a peaceful dinner at the place she had helped her son build from the ground up. As she stepped inside, the restaurant's luxurious ambiance greeted her. Crystal chandeliers casting a soft light, the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations filling the air. The clientele was a mix of elites and wealthy patrons, each more polished than the last. It wasn't long before she caught the attention of Ethan Blake, a young, ambitious waiter with a streak of prejudice he wasn't even fully aware of. Ethan approached her with what he hoped was a professional smile, but his discomfort was apparent. To him, Ophelia seemed out of place, her modest clothing at odds with the elegance surrounding her. "Good evening, ma'am. Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but distant. Ophelia, ever the picture of grace, smiled. "Yes, I'd like a table for one, please." Ethan hesitated. The restaurant was nearly full, and while there was a table available, he couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. He glanced over the sea of well-dressed patrons and made a snap decision. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight," he said. "Perhaps you could try somewhere else." For a brief moment, Ophelia's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "I see," she replied, her voice soft yet steady. "Thank you for your time." As she turned to leave, Nina Collins, the sharp-eyed manager, spotted the interaction from across the room. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized the woman's face, and she hurried over. "Mrs. Grant!" Nina exclaimed, her voice tinged with horror at what she had witnessed. "Please forgive us. Of course, we have a table ready for you." Ethan's heart sank as Nina led Ophelia to one of the best tables in the house. His throat tightened as he whispered to Nina, "Who is she?" Nina shot him a look that could cut steel. "She's the mother of Darius Grant, the man who owns this restaurant." Ethan's mind raced. He had just turned away the mother of the restaurant's owner. A cold sweat broke out across his brow, and he could already feel the shame sinking in. He had judged her by appearance alone, and now he realized how terribly wrong he had been. The restaurant hummed with the usual buzz of evening service, but Ethan couldn't focus. His mistake gnawed at him with every passing minute. He had judged Ophelia unjustly, based on her modest appearance, and the weight of his guilt was unbearable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he summoned the courage to make things right. Approaching Ophelia's table with a deep breath, Ethan cleared his throat softly, ensuring he didn't startle her. "Mrs. Grant," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "I owe you a sincere apology for earlier. I made assumptions that I shouldn't have, and I am deeply sorry for my behavior." Ophelia looked up from her menu, her eyes kind yet searching. There was a moment of silence between them, and Ethan feared the worst. But then she smiled, a smile filled with both forgiveness and understanding. "Young man," she said gently, "we all make mistakes. What matters is whether we choose to learn from them." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. Her kindness was disarming, and he realized that this was no ordinary woman. She had a depth that he couldn't quite fathom. Grateful for the second chance, Ethan nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll do better." Ophelia's warmth enveloped the conversation as they continued to talk, her stories flowing like a river, each one revealing a life filled with resilience and grace. She spoke of her childhood, of the discrimination she had faced, of the battles she had fought for her family's place in this world. Her words were soft, but their impact was hard-hitting. As Ethan listened, he found himself drawn into her world, his own prejudices crumbling under the weight of her experience. By the end of their conversation, his respect for her had deepened beyond measure. He felt changed, though he couldn't quite put it into words. But something was brewing in the air, and though neither of them knew it yet, their evening was about to take a dark turn. As Ophelia shared her stories, the atmosphere in the restaurant subtly shifted. There was a growing tension, like the calm before a storm, though it was difficult to pinpoint exactly why. In the background, Detective Fiona Hayes entered the restaurant with her trademark air of quiet intensity. Her presence was almost unnoticeable to the diners, but for those who knew her, like Nina and Darius, it was a sign that something was brewing. Detective Hayes had been investigating a string of high-profile thefts in the area, all targeting luxury restaurants like Le Nouveau Prestige. Rumor had it that tonight might be the night the thief struck again, and Hayes was determined to be one step ahead. She discreetly informed Nina of her suspicions, and they agreed to keep the restaurant open. But on high alert, unaware of the looming threat, Ophelia continued her conversation with Ethan. She touched the necklace that hung around her neck, a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations. The delicate pendant glistened softly in the low light of the restaurant, and Ethan's eyes were drawn to it. "This necklace," Ophelia said softly, "has been with my family for over 100 years. It's more than just a piece of jewelry. It carries the weight of our history, our struggles, and our triumphs." Ethan was fascinated by the story behind the necklace. It wasn't just its monetary value that made it special, it was the legacy it represented. As Ophelia spoke, he found himself lost in her words, unaware that the shadows of trouble were already creeping closer. Just as the evening seemed to settle, the lights in the restaurant flickered. At first, it was a small disturbance, barely noticed by the patrons. But then, with a sudden crack, the power went out entirely, plunging the entire room into darkness. Gasps filled the air as the sound of clattering cutlery and shuffling feet echoed in the blackened space. In the chaos, a scream pierced through the confusion, a sharp, terrified sound that sent chills down Ethan's spine. A brief scuffle could be heard, followed by hurried footsteps. Then, as suddenly as the power had gone out, the lights flickered back on. Ophelia sat still at her table, her hand gripping her chest. Her necklace, the precious family heirloom she had been wearing, was gone. Pandemonium erupted in the restaurant. Patrons stood from their tables, shocked and alarmed. Nina rushed over to Ophelia's side, her face pale as she tried to calm her down. Detective Hayes quickly took charge, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any suspicious activity. "Nobody leaves this restaurant," she commanded. "Lock the doors." Ethan felt his heart racing as the gravity of the situation sank in. He had been standing right there when the lights went out, talking to Ophelia about her necklace. Now, with the heirloom gone, suspicion was bound to fall on him. His troubled past, once a youthful mistake, now seemed like a damning mark against him. Detective Hayes approached Ophelia's table, her voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Grant, I understand you've lost something very important. We're going to find out who did this." Ethan's stomach churned as Hayes turned to him. "You were nearby when the lights went out. Is that right?" "I was," Ethan stammered. "But I didn't." Before he could finish, Ophelia raised a hand. "Detective, this young man was with me the entire time. He's innocent. I'm sure of it." Hayes paused, her eyes narrowing as she studied Ethan. Though Ophelia's words carried weight, the detective knew better than to rule anyone out. She would follow every lead, and Ethan's past meant he was still under scrutiny. The tension in the room thickened as Detective Hayes began her investigation, questioning each member of the staff and scanning the restaurant for any signs of the thief. The mood inside Le Nouveau Prestige was tense. As the investigation commenced, Detective Hayes moved swiftly, scanning every table, every face, for signs of the culprit. No one could leave. The restaurant was on lockdown until further notice. Anxiety swirled in the air as patrons murmured in confusion, some casting suspicious glances at one another. Ethan tried to remain calm, but he could feel eyes on him, questioning stares boring into his back. His past, one he had tried so hard to leave behind, now felt like a heavy weight pulling him under. But Ophelia had defended him. He clung to that lifeline as he watched Detective Hayes go about her work. Nina, the manager, stepped forward, her hands trembling as she tried to maintain her composure. "Detective," she said, "we have security cameras. Maybe they caught something?" Hayes nodded. "Good thinking. Let's check the footage." The two of them made their way to the back office, leaving the room in a state of uneasy silence. Ethan stood by Ophelia, his mind racing. "Mrs. Grant," he began, but Ophelia gently cut him off with a knowing smile. "You're worried about what they'll think of you," she said softly. "I can see it in your eyes." Ethan looked down, ashamed. "I'm scared they'll think I had something to do with it. My past, it's not exactly spotless." Ophelia reached out and took his hand, her touch firm yet kind. "The past doesn't define you, Ethan. It's how you move forward that matters. I trust you, and you must trust yourself." Her words were a balm to his soul, but before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted from across the room. One of the patrons, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for arrogance, stood up, shouting at a waiter, "What kind of place is this? I don't care if someone's necklace was stolen. I have places to be. You can't keep me here against my will." Detective Hayes returned just in time to defuse the situation. "Sir," she said sternly, "sit down. No one is leaving until I've finished my investigation. I suggest you cooperate." The businessman glared at her, but reluctantly sat back down, his face flushed with anger. Ethan watched the scene unfold, feeling the noose of suspicion tightening around everyone. Whoever had taken the necklace was still in the room, and time was running out to find them. In the back office, Nina and Detective Hayes pored over the security footage, their eyes glued to the screen. They rewound the footage to the moment the lights went out, scanning for any unusual movements. But the camera angles were limited, and the darkness had obscured much of what had happened. Then something caught Nina's eye. "Wait," she said, pointing to the screen. "Look at that man, table 6. He's moving just before the power cut, and when the lights come back on, he's closer to Mrs. Grant's table." Hayes leaned in, her eyes narrowing. The man in question was dressed impeccably, blending in with the restaurant's upscale clientele. But his actions were suspicious, subtle but there. "Who is he?" Hayes asked, her tone sharp. Nina quickly checked the reservation list. "His name's Oliver Grant, but there's no record of him being a regular here." Hayes's heart skipped a beat. "Oliver Grant? Could he be related to Ophelia?" Nina frowned, shaking her head. "I've never heard of him before, but I can check with Darius." Hayes's gut told her something was off. This Oliver Grant hadn't seemed to interact with Ophelia at all. If they were related, why hadn't he approached her? And why was he moving toward her table when the lights went out? Meanwhile, in the restaurant, Ethan sat down with Ophelia, trying to distract her from the growing tension. As they spoke, she shared more about her life, her family, and the struggles they had endured. She spoke fondly of Darius, her successful son, but there was a shadow in her voice when she mentioned the family's past. "There are things," Ophelia said softly, "that even Darius doesn't know. Family secrets that have been buried for years." Ethan listened, intrigued. "What kind of secrets?" Ophelia sighed, her eyes distant. "My late husband, before he passed, left behind more than just his wealth. He had another child, a son from before we were married. I didn't know about him for a long time, but when I found out, it nearly tore us apart." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "Another son? Does Darius know?" "No," she whispered. "I never told him. It's a painful part of our history. But I fear that my husband's past has come back to haunt us." As Ophelia spoke, a dark realization dawned on Ethan. Could this mysterious Oliver Grant be the son Ophelia had never told Darius about? Could he have something to do with the theft of the necklace? Before Ethan could voice his thoughts, Detective Hayes returned, her expression grim. "Mrs. Grant," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something. Do you know a man named Oliver Grant?" Ophelia's face went pale. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "That's him, isn't it?" Ethan whispered. "He's your husband's son." Ophelia's silence confirmed it. A cold chill ran through the room as the weight of this revelation settled in. The restaurant's patrons watched in hushed anticipation as Detective Hayes approached Oliver Grant's table. The man was sipping his wine, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around him. But when Hayes stopped in front of him, his expression shifted from indifference to guarded alertness. "Mr. Grant," Hayes said evenly, "I'd like to ask you a few questions." Oliver set his glass down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Is there a problem, Detective?" There is, Hayes replied, her tone firm. A valuable necklace was stolen during the blackout, and you were seen moving suspiciously near Mrs. Grant's table. Care to explain? Oliver's lips curled into a cold smile. I wasn't aware it was a crime to stretch my legs. Hayes didn't flinch. I also have reason to believe you're connected to Mrs. Grant in a more personal way. Care to elaborate on that? For a moment, Oliver said nothing, his eyes flicking to Ophelia across the room. The tension was palpable, and everyone held their breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. She's my stepmother, but that's none of your business, is it? The room erupted into whispers. The revelation sent shockwaves through the restaurant. Darius Grant's long-lost half-brother, a secret Ophelia had kept hidden for years, was sitting right there, and now he was a suspect in the theft. Detective Hayes didn't back down. It becomes my business when a crime is involved. Where were you when the lights went out? Oliver's eyes glinted with something dark, but he remained calm. I was exactly where I'm sitting now. If you're implying I had something to do with the theft, you'll need more than just suspicion to back it up. Hayes nodded slowly. We'll see about that. As she turned to leave, Oliver called after her, his voice smooth. Good luck, detective. You'll need it. While the investigation continued, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. He had noticed something strange when the lights flickered back on. The pendant, the family heirloom, had been gone in an instant, too quickly for a casual thief to act. It felt deliberate, planned. Ophelia's earlier words echoed in his mind. The necklace carries the weight of our history. Ethan realized there might be more at stake than just the monetary value of the stolen piece. Could the necklace hold some hidden secret? A clue to Oliver's true motives. He had to find out. As the restaurant staff continued to search for answers, Ethan slipped into the back office, determined to dig deeper into the mystery of the Grant family and uncover the truth behind the stolen heirloom before it was too late. Ethan's heart raced as he sneaked into the back office, careful to avoid catching the attention of Detective Hayes or the restaurant staff. He knew it was a risk, but something inside him pushed him forward. He had to find out the truth about Oliver, Ophelia, and the stolen necklace. The office was dimly lit, the only sound being the hum of the security monitors. Ethan sat at the desk, reviewing the footage Nina and Hayes had already scanned. His eyes scanned the room, the patrons, and Oliver in particular. The man's cold demeanor and suspicious movements during the blackout stuck out like a sore thumb. Suddenly, something odd caught Ethan's eye. Just before the lights had flickered, he noticed a slight movement under the table where Oliver sat. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but there. Ethan rewound the footage and watched again, squinting at the screen. It looked like Oliver had passed something under the table to someone sitting nearby. Ethan's pulse quickened. Was there a second person involved? Someone working with Oliver to steal the necklace? He hit pause on the footage and leaned back in his chair. The realization was dawning on him. Oliver wasn't acting alone. The theft was part of something bigger, something that involved more than just a simple grab-and-go robbery. But who else could be involved? And what were they really after? Ethan felt a strange sense of duty to uncover the truth, not just for Ophelia, but for Darius and the entire staff who had welcomed him despite his past. He knew he had to act fast before the real culprits slipped away. As Ethan wrestled with his discovery, the tension in the dining area reached a boiling point. Darius Grant, who had been relatively quiet throughout the investigation, finally approached Oliver's table. His steps were deliberate, his expression unreadable, as he faced the half-brother he never knew he had. Oliver, Darius began, his voice calm but laced with an undertone of anger. You have some explaining to do. Oliver smirked, crossing his arms. I don't owe you anything, Darius. You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter. It's time I took what's mine. Darius narrowed his eyes. Took what's yours? You're talking about the necklace, aren't you? Or is this about something deeper, something you've been holding on to all these years? Oliver's smirk faded, replaced by a bitter sneer. It's about everything. You and your perfect life. Our father left me with nothing, while you grew up with all the privileges. I've spent years scraping by while you lived in luxury. Darius shook his head, his fists clenched at his sides. I didn't know about you. I didn't know any of this until tonight. But that doesn't excuse what you've done. Oliver stood, his face inches from Darius's. I don't need your pity, Darius. I came here to get what I deserve, our father's legacy. And if that necklace holds the key, then I'll do whatever it takes to get it. The air crackled with tension as the two brothers stared each other down, their shared blood doing nothing to bridge the divide between them. Around them, the restaurant had fallen into a hushed silence, the patrons watching the drama unfold with bated breath. But before the confrontation could escalate, a sharp voice cut through the tension. Enough. It was Ophelia. Ophelia stood at the edge of the dining room, her posture regal, her face lined with the weight of years of secrets and struggles. She moved slowly toward the two men, her eyes filled with both sorrow and strength. Oliver, she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. This isn't the way. Oliver's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes as he looked at the woman who had been his stepmother in name, but a stranger in life. I never wanted to be kept in the shadows, Ophelia, Oliver said bitterly. I deserved better. Ophelia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You did, and I'm sorry that I didn't fight harder to include you in our family. But I can't change the past. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness and try to make things right. There was a long pause as Oliver's jaw clenched, the rage within him struggling against the sadness that Ophelia's words stirred. Darius, too, stood frozen, unsure how to navigate the sudden flood of emotions that had overtaken the room. You both lost so much, Ophelia continued, but this isn't the answer. The necklace, our family's history, doesn't belong to just one person. It belongs to all of us, and trying to tear it away won't bring you the peace you're seeking. Oliver? For a moment, Oliver looked as if he might relent, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But then, as if something dark inside him snapped, he turned his back on her. It's too late for that, he muttered before walking away toward the kitchen. As Oliver stormed off, Detective Hayes followed him, her instincts telling her that he wasn't finished yet. The kitchen doors swung open behind him, and Ethan, who had been watching from the back office, decided to follow as well. Inside the kitchen, the tension reached its peak. Oliver was rifling through drawers and cabinets, his face contorted with frustration. What are you looking for? Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Oliver didn't answer, but Ethan already knew the truth. The necklace wasn't the endgame, it was just a part of a much larger plan. Oliver was after something more significant. And then it hit him, the restaurant itself. The Grant family legacy wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was the entire empire that Darius had built. Before Ethan could react, Oliver pulled a small envelope from one of the drawers. Inside was a set of documents, legal papers. From the looks of it, Ethan stepped closer. What is that? Oliver glanced at him with a sneer. It's the proof that I have a right to everything my father left behind. This restaurant, this empire, it should have been mine. But before Oliver could say another word, the kitchen doors swung open and Detective Hayes entered, her gun drawn. Oliver Grant, she said firmly. You're under arrest for the theft of the Grant family heirloom and for attempting to defraud your brother. Oliver's face twisted in fury. You don't understand. This was my inheritance. Hayes shook her head. Your inheritance doesn't include stealing from your family or breaking the law. Hand over the documents and come with me. As Oliver was led away in handcuffs, the weight of the evening settled over the restaurant like a heavy fog. Darius stood by his mother's side, shaken but resolute. Ethan watched from a distance, feeling both relieved and conflicted. He had seen the worst of Oliver, but he couldn't help but wonder if things could have been different, if forgiveness could have come sooner. Ophelia approached Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Ethan smiled weakly. I just wanted to help. You did more than that, Ophelia replied. You reminded us all that forgiveness is the hardest lesson to learn, but it's also the most important. As the restaurant slowly returned to normal, the staff gathered around Ophelia and Darius, their faces a mixture of relief and respect. Nina placed a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder, and for the first time that evening, he felt like he truly belonged. In the end, the necklace was returned, the family's secrets were brought into the light, and though the wounds ran deep, the Grant family began the slow process of healing. Ophelia's wisdom and grace had once again shown that it wasn't material wealth or legacies that defined them. It was the strength to forgive and move forward. The silence that settled over the restaurant in the wake of Oliver's arrest was thick with unspoken emotions. Darius stood still, staring at the spot where his half-brother had been taken away, his mind swirling with the weight of all that had transpired. For years, he had carried the burden of his family's legacy, unaware of the secrets and resentment lurking beneath the surface. Ophelia, standing beside her son, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over now, Darius. You did everything you could." Darius exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging. "I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know about Oliver, about the pain he carried. I can't help but feel responsible." Ophelia's eyes softened, reflecting the wisdom of her years. "You can't hold on to the guilt of things you didn't know. What matters now is how you move forward, how you heal. Forgiveness isn't just for Oliver, it's for yourself too." Darius looked down, absorbing her words. He had always respected his mother's strength, but tonight it resonated with him in a way he had never fully understood before. He realized that forgiveness wasn't an act of weakness, but one of the greatest strengths a person could possess. The days following the incident were quieter in the restaurant, but the ripple effects of that fateful evening remained. Ethan found himself at a crossroads. His past had been dragged into the open, his old mistakes laid bare for all to see. Yet, something remarkable had happened. Instead of judgment, he had been met with a surprising amount of support. Nina had been one of the first to offer her encouragement. "We all have pasts, Ethan," she had said firmly. "What matters is what you do now." Detective Hayes, too, had approached him with words of advice. "You've proven yourself, kid. You stood up when it mattered most. Don't let anyone, least of all yourself, tell you that you don't deserve a second chance." But it was Ophelia's quiet, unwavering belief in him that had the most profound impact. She had shown him that even in the darkest moments, there was room for grace, for redemption. One afternoon, as Ethan worked diligently to help restore order in the restaurant, Darius approached him. "Ethan," he began, his voice calm but sincere, "I've been watching you. I know you've had your struggles, but you've shown more heart and integrity than most people ever will." Ethan straightened, unsure of where the conversation was heading. "I'd like to offer you a permanent position here at the restaurant," Darius continued. "But more than that, I want you to consider this place a fresh start, a place where you can build something you're proud of." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. He had spent so long running from his past, convinced that his mistakes would forever define him. But here, in the very place where he had once felt like an outsider, he was being offered a chance to truly belong. I don't know what to say," Ethan stammered. "Just say yes," Darius said with a smile, "and prove to yourself that you're worth it." As the days passed, the Grant family began to heal. Ophelia, ever the pillar of wisdom, took it upon herself to reach out to Oliver, despite the pain he had caused. She visited him in jail, sitting across from the man who had nearly torn her family apart. "I'm not here to condemn you, Oliver," she said softly. "I'm here to offer you a choice." Oliver, his face hardened by bitterness and regret, remained silent, but Ophelia could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. "I know you're angry," she continued. "You feel like the world wronged you, and maybe in some ways it did. But that doesn't mean you have to let it define who you are. You have a chance to make things right, to rebuild your life. It's up to you whether you take it." Oliver finally met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so many years consumed by jealousy and hatred, convinced that he had been denied the life he deserved. But now, sitting across from the woman who had every reason to hate him, but chose forgiveness instead, he began to realize that perhaps his future wasn't as bleak as he had once thought. "I don't know if I can fix everything I've done," Oliver admitted, his voice strained. "You don't have to fix everything," Ophelia replied. "You just have to start by forgiving yourself. The rest will come in time." Ethan's life in the restaurant took on new meaning as he embraced his role with renewed purpose. The restaurant staff, once skeptical of him, now welcomed him as part of their family. His relationships with Nina, Detective Hayes, and even Darius grew stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. But it was Ophelia who continued to serve as his guiding light. She would often stop by the restaurant, not just as a customer, but as a mentor to Ethan. They would sit together during his breaks, sharing stories about their lives, their struggles, and the lessons they had learned along the way. One evening, as the two sat in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Ethan turned to Ophelia with a question that had been on his mind for some time. "Why did you believe in me?" he asked quietly. "Why did you stand up for me when no one else would?" Ophelia smiled gently, her eyes filled with warmth. "Because I saw myself in you, Ethan. I've made mistakes too. I've been judged for things people didn't understand. But I learned long ago that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to change." "I knew you were." Ethan looked down, humbled by her words. "I just hope I can live up to that." "You already have," Ophelia replied, "by choosing to be better. That's all anyone can do." Months after the events that had shaken the Grant family, the restaurant was thriving once again. The scars of the past had not been erased, but they had been transformed into something stronger, something more resilient. Darius had taken steps to expand the business, but this time he did so with a new perspective. He no longer saw the restaurant as just a symbol of his success, but as a testament to the values his mother had instilled in him: compassion, integrity, and the power of forgiveness. Ethan, now a trusted and valued member of the team, continued to work hard, not just to prove himself to others, but to honor the faith that Ophelia and Darius had placed in him. He knew that his journey was far from over, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. As for Ophelia, she continued to be the heart and soul of the Grant family. Her quiet strength, her wisdom, and her ability to see the best in people had brought them through the darkest of times. And in the end, it was her legacy, not the necklace, not the restaurant, but her love and forgiveness that had truly united them all. In the final chapter of this story, the restaurant's grand reopening was celebrated with a lavish event. But it wasn't the food or the atmosphere that drew the attention of the guests. It was the sense of community, of family, of redemption that permeated the air. And as the evening came to a close, Ethan, Darius, Nina, and Ophelia stood together, looking out over the restaurant that had become so much more than just a place of business. It was a place of new beginnings, second chances, and the enduring power of forgiveness. What does it truly mean to forgive someone who has wronged you? Can the wounds of betrayal and prejudice ever fully heal? How far would you go to protect your family and your integrity? Life offers us chances for redemption, but do we always recognize them when they appear? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections and let your voice be heard in the comments below. Your perspectives could inspire others, just as this story has. Thank you for watching.